Right, we're just kicking off the recording here. So welcome everyone. This is our first lightning design review for your Windows Phone apps. Just going to give you a couple clarifications before we begin. This week we only have a couple of apps submitted. Everyone's still kind of getting underway with planning out their apps and laying the groundwork and whatnot, so it's going to be a little bit of a short session. Also, I wanted to let you know that these design reviews are provided by 352 Media Group as a service. This is just advice from designers, and we're not part of the judging process. So whatever you decide to take from these sessions and incorporate into your apps, that's totally up to you. All right, so let's get started. First app that we're going to take a look at is called Awesome Sounds, and the idea behind this app is that you can browse a variety of sound effects and you can play them, and if you want you can choose one and use it as a ringtone for your phone. So let's take a look at it. This is a splash screen for Amazing Sounds, and this is a pretty well designed splash screen. We've got clearly the title of the app, and there's a little bit of a credit to the developer down on the bottom. This is not typically like a kind of a Metro style splash screen where you would have more like vector graphics and that sort of Windows Phone look, but it does accomplish some key things, just letting you know that you did tap on the right thing, the app is booting up, so it does kind of get the job done. Once the app starts up, you can see that we're using a pivot control to get through some sound categories. You'll see in a second there are other categories like funny sounds. This one is abstract sounds. And so I wanted to talk about a couple things on this screen. One is that we're using a texture as a background. And that's not usually something you see on Windows Phone apps. In fact, the Metro design guidelines, they kind of strictly prohibit it. If you were to talk to some designers at Microsoft, they would tell you not to use ever use textures at all. But some apps, it can be a little difficult to make your app look a little bit different or add some personality to it if you don't have an illustrator on hand making custom artwork or something like that. So a texture is somewhat common. The reason that that Windows Phone designers recommend not using textures is that it can be a little distracting. And you can see here, especially down as you get down towards the titles on the lower half of this page, it gets hard to read the white text on the lighter textures. So what I would recommend doing there is try building your app without using a background image, especially one that's very noisy like this. And actually, if you want, you can use a more subtle texture, like on half of what's being used on the splash screen right here. That's a little easier. If you had like white or black text on that, it's a little easier to read than this kind of glass mosaic that we have going on here. So I wanted to also talk about the point. This is another one of those really pervasive design patterns that you see all throughout Windows Phone apps. Now this image is something that you can find at this link. This is a blog post by Arturo Toledo, and he's a very talented guy that was involved in Windows Phone and Metro from the beginning, and he provides this grid in a variety of formats on this blog post here. I'll open it up on the web page to see his blog post. He talks about overlaying these PNGs that he provides links to into your actual app. You can actually toss them in as an element in Visual Studio or Expression Blend and lay them over your app. And the idea behind this grid is that whatever you're making, tiles, text, controls, whatever, it all snaps into that grid. And this ensures that you're using the correct margins and the right sizes for controls, and it also makes your app just have that Windows Phone feel. All the native apps and the ones that look really crisp are using this grid. So I highly recommend checking that out. If we go back over to our awesome sounds screen here, this pivot, you can see that some of the elements, and probably the elements that are taken from the templates that come with the projects, like this pivot view here, the word abstract is fitting very nicely into our grid. And but as we go down a little bit further, you can see that some of these other elements that were added by the developer, they don't quite fit in. You can see they kind of break out and they overlap some of these regions a little bit. And it's something that where if the grid wasn't there, if the red boxes weren't there, you wouldn't really notice it. And you may think the app looks fine, but the grid really establishes a visual rhythm for all the pages. And it's one of those things where if you start using one app that doesn't follow a grid, something just kind of feels a little bit off about it. So you'd be amazed at what you can do just overlaying this grid in your application and making sure that all the pieces just snap into place and are just kind of aligned on those grid lines. The other thing I wanted to point out about this particular screen is that these list elements, this alarm and aquarium and atmospheric, these are indented from the left a little bit, almost like you would see a list in a word processing application or on a web page or something like that. But that's not really a design pattern we see in Windows Phone. Typically, these elements are aligned to this far left edge right here. And that's one of the most common ways in which designers will break this grid, and users will see it and say, "This, something seems a little bit off about this. I can't quite put my finger on it." So if you make sure that all of your content elements and your controls visually align with that left edge, you'll be in really good shape to have a really sharp-looking Windows Phone application. Now, there is one kind of exception to that, and that is if you were to include an icon, like let's say a circle button icon for these items. So you can imagine that maybe each one of these rows starts out with like a play button, like a circle button to actually tap the item and play the sound. And that gives the user kind of a hint of what's going to happen when they tap on that element. And they know when they see the circle button, I can tap it and it's a play. It's obvious that I'm going to play it. And so there's space here if the developer wanted to add in a circle button icon there. So this is the same screen that you just saw, except that the aquarium item is selected. And you can see that the app bar is popped up with some options for what you can do with that sound now that it's selected. And again, you can see here where the texture in the background and the color of the aquarium font is kind of clashing. It's a little hard to read, and the colors, they don't really jive together very well. And so two things to keep in mind here. Again, make the texture very subtle or remove it altogether. And secondly, make sure that if you're using accent colors like this, that you're actually using the user's preference for accent colors. And that's another thing to keep in mind when you're styling the background of your application is how does the user's preference play into that? If they choose a light theme or a dark theme for their phone, is your application's background just kind of be slapped onto that and almost make the user feel like you're ignoring their preferences? If you use a plain background or a transparent PNG background, their light or dark theme preferences for their phone are going to come through as you design your application. So that the app on the bottom there, and this is pretty well designed here. We've got circle buttons. You can see the labels pop up that they're well labeled. Play, obvious play button. You want to keep these labels pretty short so that people don't have to read them as a long phrase and try to figure out what's going to happen. So these are pretty good labels. And this extended set of options here for settings is the first option is, again, it's labeled like a command, save as ringtone. I know exactly what's going to happen when I tap that. The second one is phrase like a question. And when you phrase labels for interactive elements with a question, I'm not really sure as a user what's going to happen when I tap on that. I may love your app, but what's going to happen? Am I going to be taken to the store where I can rate your app? Is it going to take me to a Facebook application where I like your app? I'm not really sure what's going to happen. So you just want to make sure that you label those interactive elements very clearly and in a way that is sort of like a command: save, play, very clear. So this page is an about page. It just gives a little bit of information about the version of the application, who developed it, and how to contact them. Again, this is sort of, if you refer back to the grid, making sure that everything is left aligned to that edge is going to make your application have more of that Windows Phone feel, and it's also going to make it easier to read. There's this concept in graphic design when you're laying out pages where you have this visual rhythm and you have this visual flow, and when your eye can just kind of go straight down a line, boom, 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 just straight down in a vertical line, it's very easy for you to process all information, see it very quickly. If you had to draw a line on this particular page from one item to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, you'd see it zigzagging back and forth. It's very subtle. It's just one of those things that fatigues your eye a little bit. It's something that just makes users have to work a little bit more to get the information. And one of the great things about Windows Phone and using that grid is that users, they experience the phone and they feel like this just works. Things are easy, they're clear, they're obvious, they can just understand everything. And following some of those guidelines will give you that same feeling. I also wanted to talk about application flow. This is something that everyone should do when you're planning out your app. You can really do it at any point during your application's development, but it's basically to make a kind of a flowchart or a sitemap of all the pages in your app and sort of how they relate to each other. When we were looking at the About page a second ago, I wasn't really quite sure how I got there, and that's partly just because I have images of the application. I'm not interacting with it myself, but I'm looking at that and I'm thinking it's kind of like a global page. Like I might want to be able to access that from anywhere, as opposed to other pages like the sound categories. It's more like I'm drilling down and I'm navigating throughout the app. So this is a typical application flow. I just made this in a couple of minutes, and this is specifically for awesome sounds, but you can do it for your own application. It doesn't have to look great. You can do it with a pen on a napkin, and just something that helps you organize your thoughts a little bit better, and in a way where you know when you're setting up your page navigations and your menus and your app bars, where you know that you're putting stuff in the right place. So on the left side of the screen, you can see I've mapped out all the pages that relate to each other. And if you had if this particular application had more pages, like maybe a detail page for each individual sound, I might put them down below underneath as like a third row under abstract and funny. It's really showing how those parent-child and sibling relationships among the pages that you have and how you're navigating through them. Over on the top right, I have app-wide navigation. So these are pages where I want to be able to access them from anywhere, like the About page. It doesn't really pertain to any particular sound or sound category. It's just a page that I might want to access from anywhere, and it's more of like a utility. It's also not something as a user I'd want to browse. When you're making a panorama or a pivot view for several pages, those are great opportunities to put categories of information or sort of a dashboard view where you're going to want to browse around for updates and information. But if you have a utility page, like settings or about or something like that, you want to put that down in the app bar. The other thing you want to think about after you've fleshed out the pages and how they all relate to each other are the commands. And the commands are things that you would often think about as like a button or a circle button. Playing, in this particular application, we're talking playing a sound. We're talking about turning the repeating of sounds off and on, and potentially rating the app. I'm not sure what that option actually does, so that might be a command. And these are going to affect where you put the interaction for that particular item. Typically, commands are going to be in the app bar, as opposed to being a tile or something like that. A tile or an item in the canvas would be something that you would navigate to another page. But if it's a command, more of a contextual action, you would want to put that in the app bar. There are some exceptions for that, but it's sort of like the 90% rule. The second app that we're going to look at today is called K-Squares, and K-Squares is kind of still in the concept stage. The developer submitted some sketches and some descriptions of what they're planning on building and what they're in the process of laying the groundwork for, and that's great. I'll click onto the next couple screens where you just some notes that they're taking, and this is a great place to start when you're building your application. I know when I'm developing something, it's very tempting to just dive in. I'm already thinking about how I'm going to develop it and what code libraries I'm going to use, but this is a great place to start, is just kind of sketch it out and just make sure that your ideas make sense on paper. So this particular app, K-Square, is it's a custom tile notification aggregator. So basically the idea behind it is that it has the same sort of tile functionality as the tiles on your home screen, where you can see you have 2 new emails or Facebook updates or whatnot. But the idea with this app is it extends that a little bit further, and it adds some accelerometer capabilities, where if you shake the phone, the tiles do something special. And there's some really interesting ideas in here. I don't want to give away all of the developers' ideas. It's a really good opportunity to talk about live tile templates and what your options are with those. Forgive me because this app is a little early in development. Some of what I'm about to talk about may be useful to the developer, but I think it'll be useful to everyone. That's just on the screen. I'll flip back to it in a second. Is the MSDN article on tiles for Windows Phone. And this is an article. It gives you not only some guidelines of just general what the technical specifications are of the tiles, but also it gives you some examples of the templates and what you can do with them. So what's important to note here is that when you're implementing a tile in the actual operating system, what you can do with that is limited. And it's limited to a few templates and a few different sizes. And you can supply your own information or images and numbers. You can push data up on live tiles, out to the home screen where the user can see it. But you are limited to these templates, and you can see how this is a flip template where you can supply an image with a count and then some text on the back. So when the tile flips over, there's some more information. This is an iconic template where you would supply an icon for your app, and it's used in a variety of different ways on the live tile. And this is a cycle template where you just provide a few images and it flips through them in sort of a slideshow format. And so you might start thinking about, this is one of the ways in which Windows Phone apps are really unique and can be really tailored for users and really delightful for users to pin to their home screen and resize and juggle around. It's one of the things that people really love doing with their Windows phones. So you might start thinking about, even if this isn't a core component of your app's idea, start thinking about what you can do with your live tile that might just make it a little bit more unique and add a little bit more value for the user. Down towards the bottom of this article, it gives you some more specifications for pixel sizes for each of the tile sizes, just technical specs, and if you're designing your own icons, you want to make sure that they're high enough resolution so they're going to look good on those high resolution screens. So the options, this particular app, K-Squares, has a lot of really cool ideas, and I'm not sure how many of them are actually going to be able to be executed on the home screen, but what you could do is you could actually implement some of them inside of the app itself. You could make a series of nice live tiles that the user could pin to their home screen, but inside of the app is where you do some tailored notifications and maybe provide some more information than the operating system does by default. This is really kind of risky territory to get into, in my opinion, because you don't, every time you're emulating something that the operating system already kind of does by default, then you're kind of always in competition with it. And if you don't emulate it perfectly, maybe tiles in Windows Phone do something, like you can change the size of them, or you can do a long press on them and unpin it. You're going to have to emulate that same functionality inside of your application for your own version of your tiles. And if you don't have that, then it's going to kind of feel like something's missing. So this has a lot of potential. I think there's some really cool things you could do as just an aggregator for social media and updates. But you just want to be careful about how you implement it if you start emulating controls or things like tiles that really already exist. So that's the end of today's Lightning review session. We only had 2 apps, so it's pretty short. We're going to have another one in a week. That's going to be on December 20th. And the cutoff date for that is Tuesday. So I see there's a few people on here who are just checking out the sessions for right now and seeing what it's like. So, feel free to submit your app. We take the first 12, so sort of first come, first serve. And we'll make sure to get you in. The submission forms and the video recording for this session is going to be available on that same page where you signed up for the session or submitted your app. That's 352media.com/app to the future. And that's it for today. Thank you all for attending.